Hello everybody, and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips. And today I want to talk about happy stuff for a change, people who are resisting. And I'll start with a wonderful video that I watched from a police officer. He didn't identify his name, but you could see his face. He wasn't trying to hide who he was. I reported last week that the police union in New York City had sent a letter to Mayor de Blasio saying they didn't want to be involved in enforcing this social distancing situation. And another brave policeman, this guy's been in law enforcement for 10 years, made this video. And I thought it was wonderful. He speaks out against officers being asked to enforce what he refers to as tyrannical orders against citizens, somewhat like what I was talking about yesterday. He says people are being arrested for going to church, for going surfing, for going to the park with their families, or doing nails out of their house, and these are not crimes, he says. He asks law enforcement officers to ask themselves, is what I'm doing right? He says, quote, "We do not have the authority to do these things to people because a governor or mayor or chief of police tells us to do so. We're being asked to violate people's constitutional rights and deprive them of their freedom. Governments," he says, "derive their power from the consent of the governed." This is specifically stated in the Constitution. And I'm appalled at the number of politicians who don't really seem to be very familiar with our Constitution. So perhaps a condition of holding office, this is my editorial comment, might be a little history class, because clearly these people were not educated about this before they became politicians. So the police officer says government does not hold power over its citizens. What is being done is contrary to everything our country stands for, such as freedom of religion and freedom of assembly. People have been stopped and asked for papers showing that they're essential workers. This is illegal. Are we now the Gestapo? It kind of sounds like it, doesn't it? In the U.S., you can't stop people unless you have reasonable cause. Officers who are going out and enforcing these tyrannical orders are widening the gap between public trust and law enforcement. Already there's less and less of this due to isolated incidents that have been blown out of proportion, but the incidents are no longer isolated and they're happening with increasing frequency. By continuing this way, this officer says, we're going to wake a sleeping giant. Americans are going to fight 10 times harder for their rights. The American spirit of defiance is going to rise, and it will be a big problem for our country. It is going to be a big problem. If this does not stop, we're going to see bloodshed in the street, and most police are not ready or trained for combat. His advice to fellow officers is this: you can't excuse yourself by saying you were following orders. The current situation does not allow you to trample on people's rights. You need to stand up for what's right. Say to your superiors, that's not me, that's not what I signed up for. If you get fired, so be it. At least you'll be able to look in the mirror and be okay with yourself. Look inside yourself and ask, am I doing the right thing? No order or amount of money or anything should be able to make you go against doing the right thing. If we all stand up together, this will be a non-issue because people in law enforcement will be united like we should be. And I want you to hold on to that thought, if we all stand up together. More on that in just a few more days. So, in line with that, the Wisconsin Supreme Court overturned the state's stay-at-home order and ruled it unlawful and unenforceable. The court ruled that Democrat Governor Tony Evers' administration overstepped its authority when the order was extended to May 26th. The suit was filed against the state's Department of Health Services Secretary Andrea Palm and miscellaneous other health officials. The justices wrote, quote, "An agency cannot confer on itself the power to dictate the lives of law-abiding individuals as comprehensively as the order does without reaching beyond the executive branch's authority." Every governor in the United States should be mailed or emailed that decision. Evers' response, he thinks this will put the state in chaos, somewhat like the election that didn't result in anything bad happening. He says, now we have no plan and no protections for the people of Wisconsin. Well, on the day of the judgment, Wisconsin had recorded 10,902 cases of COVID-19 and 421 deaths. This contrasts with the 2018-19 season when the Wisconsin Department of Health reported 17,210 cases of flu and 379 deaths. Now notice 42 additional deaths, even with the reporting misbehavior that I've been talking about for weeks now. They could only gin up 42 additional deaths. So who knows, really, with the testing and that sort of thing. We don't know how many cases and deaths there are because the tests don't work. They're not accurate. The inventor of one of the tests that's most commonly used says there's a 60% inaccuracy rate. And you might remember I reported that David Katz, when he was working at that Bronx hospital, said there were 20-some patients that he and the others they were absolutely convinced they had COVID. They all test negative. So anyway, and then let me tell you what's going on in Pennsylvania. We have another governor in Pennsylvania who has appointed himself the king, and he has set up 3 phases for reopening. Red, and this came from a Pennsylvania resident who's pretty angry, red was no easing of the restrictions, yellow is some easing, and then green is when you can finally go out and take back your civil rights. We started with 24 counties out of 67, which he moved from the red phase to the yellow phase on Friday, May 8th. And then on that day, he announced that 13 more would move to yellow by Friday, May 15th. Also on Friday, he extended the stay-at-home order till June 4th, because we can see how well that's working, and we can see how dangerous it has been shown to be to go out and vote and all that sort of thing. So you can understand why he locked everything down. His original guidelines stated that in order for a county or a region, he never made it clear if we were doing counties or regions, to move from red to yellow, it had to have 50 new cases or less per 100,000 people over a 14-day period. Well, there were several counties that met this criteria, but he wouldn't let them reopen. When questioned about this, the Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine, said that they're looking at many different criteria in deciding whether to allow a county to open. There was a Senate hearing last Monday, which the writer listened to. Many senators were frustrated because they couldn't get a good answer on what they had to do in order for their counties to satisfy the governor's office and be able to open. Secretary Levine sidestepped each question just by saying they're looking at many different criteria and data. And this is typical all across the board. These are the criteria except when we say they aren't. And we want to flatten the curve, and we have to flatten the curve, and the curve is flat. Now we have to keep it flat. We have to flatten the curve. People are going bankrupt. People are starving. Flatten the curve, flatten the curve. I've said this before. It's like these people had chips put in their head by Martians, and their lips are being controlled from spaceships, because I've never seen such nonsense come out of so many people's mouths in my life. All right, well, here's the hopeful part. This past Friday, about 5 counties sent the governor letters. They plan to move to the yellow phase despite his order that they stay in the red. More and more counties followed suit. My county, Lancaster, sent a letter to him yesterday stating that they're moving to yellow regardless of whether or not he cooperates. The district attorneys and the sheriffs in those counties have announced that they will not be prosecuting violators, and so the police are joining the resistance, and this is so encouraging because when the Nazis were plowing their way through Europe, the places that were the most awful, such as in Paris, were where the police decided to side with the Nazis. So we have good police who are not helping with this mess. There's one restaurant with 2 locations in York County, one of the counties moving to yellow on its own, which opened up for indoor seating this past weekend. People drove for hours to wait in line to be seated. I just wanted to let you know that people are finally standing up here. I'm so appreciative of our county commissioners and state legislators, almost all of whom signed the letter to the governor. So we have a guy who's appointed himself king of the universe for the people of Pennsylvania, makes capricious decisions, won't explain why or give any specific information. It's despicable. It's despicable. And one of these days, I want a Nuremberg type of trial for these people who did this. Really. And I think that the class action suits that should come from people who've been ruined as a result of this should go on into perpetuity until these people pay for what they did. I'm very angry about this. Okay, some more people standing up. On May 10th, Pastor Christian Ionescu opened his Elam Romanian Pentecostal Church in Chicago, and 100 people from his congregation came, 10 times the number allowed by the Emperor J. Pritzker. Ionescu is one of 5 Romanian pastors who announced that not only would they be reopening on May 10th, but they would not be following the 10-person limit. According to Pastor Stephen Castle of Beloved Church, also in the Chicago area, he's aware of 86 churches that opened on May 10th. Mayor Lori Lightfoot had previously announced at a May 2 press conference that anybody who knowingly violated the stay-at-home orders would be taken to jail. Anybody who violated the orders about gatherings and that sort of thing would be fined and taken to jail, but no law enforcement showed up on May 10th. Again, congratulations to the Chicago police for not following the emperor's orders. According to Ionescu, the mayor's threat of arrest reminds him of his time living in communist Romania. There, pastors and others were treated as criminals and thrown in jail for holding gatherings that were forbidden by the government. He said, Lightfoot's orders gave me shivers. Governor Pritzker has laid out a 5-phase plan for opening the state, and the 5th phase, which allows for larger gatherings, is not slated to take place until there are no new cases of COVID or a vaccine or treatment is available. Pritzker says it might take a year, so no concerts or sports until the Emperor Pritzker says it's okay. And I'm sure that there will be some reason, even when the vaccine is available, not until everybody in the state of Illinois has a vaccine, and then not until we have another 15 years go by. I mean, this is, well, lawsuits are being filed all over the country challenging these kinds of ridiculous orders and restrictions on gatherings. And it's going to be a long process, but I'm pretty confident in the end the Supreme Court is going to rule, and we have to go through this process to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again. Just FYI, a precedent-setting case is 1972 United States versus Bell, which addressed whether the threat of planes being hijacked warranted the search of all passengers based on the discretion of police officers acting on, quote, trained intuition. The court ruled that the searches were an unjustified infringement on personal liberties. Judge Walter Mansfield's opinion on the case stated, quote, if the danger to the public posed by the current wave of hijackings were held to constitute adequate ground for such a broad expansion of police power, the sharp increase in the rate of serious crimes in our major cities could equally be used to justify similar searches of persons or homes in high crime areas based solely on the trained intuition of the police. With the door thus opened, a serious abuse of individual rights would almost inevitably follow. And the last inspirational thing, Elon Musk announced that his Fremont factory in California had reopened, disobeying the orders to remain closed. Quote, Tesla is restarting production today against Alameda County rules. I will be on the line with everyone else, and if anyone is arrested, I ask that it only be me. On Monday, May 11th, the parking lot was full. There are like 10,000 workers at this plant, and trucks were rolling out of the parking lot with cars. Musk rightly stated that the order he violated was not lawful and was issued by an unelected county official. And 2 days later, he was given permission by the government to remain open. Again, nonsensical, nonsense, ridiculous. So it's good that people are resisting. It's good that law enforcement is starting to see that their role is to enforce the law, not to enforce tyrannical orders given by people who have appointed themselves. This is like a coup. The governed, that's us. We get to elect people who uphold our Constitution. The Constitution dictates what they're allowed to do. These people have tossed this aside. This is no different than armed people who represent the Socialist Party going into the governor's mansion and taking somebody out and putting their own person in. They just managed to get people who are already elected to turn into these type of tyrannical, terrible people. And like I said, we must make sure that this never happens again, and that all of this contact tracing and forced vaccination and everything they have in mind for us never happens as well. All right, as usual, pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy watching it, and I will be back to you tomorrow with more news.